Now that we have the ridge line sewn with the flat felled seam, I'm going to cut the tie-out reinforcements so that the depth of them, including the seam allowance, is at least 6 inches, and then we're going to sew those on. I have this gray fabric for this. I'm just going to cut some patches out. I'm going to attach them and then I'm going to trim them. Just to show you what we have going on here. If this is a corner piece, my cutting ruler here is 6 inches deep. If this is our corner piece and we've got it lined up right on the corners, we're going to want our patch to be 12 inches in this direction at least when we cut it. But I think I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I am going to make it, mine, I think, 7 inches in which case I am going to have my strips here. And I have to also include the seam allowance. I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra. I'm going to cut my strips so that they're 17 inches wide and 8 inches deep. And then for the ridge line here, we'll trim off this point which we created with our flat felled seam. Just trim that back. And now, if I follow the same principle as that, I'll want these pieces to be about, about 17 inches also. So 8, we'll make them a little bit bigger, that way we can trim them back. So on his instructions, Black Bishop says that you can have your tie out to be either so that they'll be visible or not visible. So you can decide what exactly you want to do in that regard. And what he does in his instructions is that he sews this hem first and then sews it down. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to give myself about 1 inch in that direction, and I'm going to sew so that I can flip it over. So I've lined up my strip of fabric here at the corner so that it's 6.5 inches from the edge of the fabric to the point, and then if I sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, that'll give me a 7-inch triangle, and then this will fold over, and then I'll trim everything back. So what I'm going to do on the sewing machine is I'm going to run a seam right across here, and then I'm going to fold it, and at every inch I'm going to run another parallel seam so that I have the corners all reinforced. I've changed my foot back to my nylon foot. The nylon foot is nice for going over slippery fabrics. It prevents bunching up. And I have the black thread in my needle and in my bobbin. This is the Mara 70 thread. So I'm just lining everything up so that I have the fabric here so that it's at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then I'm holding this top string of my thread so that I don't get bunching. And I'm just going to lock my stitch. Then when I stop my machine, I'm keeping the foot in the down position, and I'm just running a straight seam all the way across. I'll make sure I don't have any fabric underneath there that's going to cause problems. When I get to the end here, I'll just lock the stitch. Now I have this triangle sewn on, and I'll want to sort of press it flat and sew it down to the triangle. But I found that it's a lot easier for me to see what's going on if I flip it over now. And I've got the triangle here. And see, I didn't cut the triangle before attaching it, and I'm going to trim it later, but you can see the advantage that that has, and that I don't have to worry about this all precisely lining up. I'm just going to fold everything flat. I want everything flat. I don't want this fabric underneath to be bunchy at all. And I've got this seam guide here on my machine. This is this little piece of equipment, and it just fits behind my foot, and now I can sew with this lined up along this seam. I want that to be 1 inch, so I'm going to use my seam gauge here to line that up with my needle at 1 inch. And I'm going to just follow along so that this runs along this seam, and that'll give me a nice straight parallel lines. So just like I've been doing, I'm holding this top thread so that I don't get bunching on these first few stitches, because with my machine that'll kind of get down in the bobbin and cause a nest on the other side. Now I've got this lined up here. I've got all of this nice and flat. And I'm just going to try and sew as straight as I can right down the way, just smoothing it out with every few stitches. When I stop, I want my needle down, that way I don't lose my place, and I'm just making sure I don't have any fabric from the rest of the tarp sort of folded up underneath here, because that will cause problems. And now I can see where I'm sewing on the end here, which if this were upside down I wouldn't be able to see where this edge was. So I know where to stop sewing. Lock my stitch right at the end. And I'll make a few more parallel rows here, just following the same sequence. Smooth it out with your hands here. This is what this looks like now from the front, and then from the back with my parallel rows of seams, and because I used that seam guide I got nice parallel rows. But again, marking that with a pencil will also give you nice straight lines. And now that this is sewn on, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to trim right along the edge of this black fabric. And then my triangle matches perfectly now with my tarp. So I've got 6 of these total on the tarp, 2 at the ridge line and then 4 at the bottom corners because it's a hex tarp. So we're going to do 6 of these before we roll the hem. Now that my triangles are all on my tarp, I'm going to do a double rolled hem. And Black Bishop, on his pattern, he likes to do a grosgrain hem. And so if you like a grosgrain hem, then by all means do a grosgrain hem. But I like a double rolled hem, so that's what I'm going to do. And I put my double rolled hem foot on my machine, and I'm just going to do a double rolled hem all the way around my tarp with this foot. And I have a lot of explanation in other videos on how to use this foot. So if you're interested in doing a double rolled hem and you want to try the double rolled hem foot, then you can do that and learn all the details. It's got a learning curve to it. It's not the most intuitive foot for a sewing machine, but it does a beautiful double rolled hem, and it's especially nice on tarps because you get a very fine small hem that's very tight, and it allows it very precise, makes for a good strong double rolled hem. So that's what we're going to do here. I've got tissue paper underneath because of the slipping, and the need for traction with this silicone coated fabric is especially important when doing the double rolled hem. So I'm just going to buzz a hem all the way around my tarp. I don't know if you can see what's coming out the back side, but it's a really nice way of finishing off a tarp edge with this double rolled hem foot. The narrower your hem, the easier it is to make the curves. So, that's something to keep in mind. If you've got a big chunky hem, it's harder to do the curves. And so even though this very narrow double rolled hem foot looks a little intimidating to some folks, it's actually easier to do a tight curve when you've got this tight double rolled hem foot. The catenary curve doesn't give it a problem. Success with the double rolled hem foot is like 95% technique. So just practice your technique. If you're struggling with it, then check out the other videos I've made where I break it down. But if you use a double rolled hem foot on the edge of a tarp, especially one with catenary curves, because here I have to put another piece of tissue paper under here, I've run out. Especially one with catenary curves, because all of those hems are curved. It's actually easier to get the hem in if the hem is smaller. You have less bulk trying to make that curve. So if you've been struggling with doing double rolled hems, then you may want to give this a try. But I would say on the scale of sewing skill that you need to use a double rolled hem foot, you're definitely in the medium range. So if you're very new at sewing, practice some of the other stitches and the other sort of camping components before you attempt to do this. You can kind of see the quality of what we're getting here with the double rolled hem foot. We're getting a nice tight double rolled hem, and this is on a catenary curve, so it's nice and tight. And then this tissue paper, when we're done, we just sort of, it's perforated by the stitches, so we just kind of pull it off, and then it just comes right off the back. Got 6 pieces of webbing cut at 12 inches long, and I'm just going to melt the edges in this candle so that they don't fray. Just take a few passes over in the flame. I want these to cool down completely before I touch them to the tarp, because you wouldn't want this hot plastic melting a hole in your tarp or leaving an ugly smudgy stain on your tarp. Now Black Bishop says that he has his a little bit shorter, but I'm going for a full 12 inches. That way I have lots of places to sew attachments to. So use whatever length you feel comfortable with. I have each piece I'm going to put with the Beastie D-ring. And then I'm going to just do a seam right here to hold this in place. I'm going to put my regular foot back on. This is my nylon foot, but any regular foot will do. And I'm lining this webbing up so that I have the two sides lined up perfectly. And I have this part here. I'm just going to put it under the foot and I'm going to lock it in place. And I'm going to set it down so that my needle begins and ends in the center here. That way, when I begin and end sewing, I don't have frayed edges at the very end. We'll lock it right in the middle. So I just went back and forth a few times just to hold that in place. And I'll tack down every one just like that. Now this is the corner of the tie out. I've got 6 of these on the tarp with the tarp fabric on one side, and then on the inside I've got the gray reinforcement fabric. And what I'm going to do is just take this and make a sandwich so that I've got 1/2 of this webbing on the outside and then the other half on the inside. And Black Bishop has his sort of sandwiched in here like that. We want to make sure that it's even so that we have the same amount of triangle on this side as we have on that side. And I'm just going to eyeball it. Now, you don't want these two things to sort of twist on one another, so it's really important that you just kind of hold them with your fingers and feel to make sure that everything's lined up all right. And then when you have it in place and it feels good, we're just going to tack down the outer edge. I'm just feeling to make sure I've got it in a good situation before I start to sew. I'm going to do a series of stitches to now completely sew this on, and I want to make sure this doesn't twist on me while I'm sewing. So I'm just going to hold this so that the apex of this corner is in between these two layers right at the end, and I'm going to come up the edge and get pretty close to the top with the needle down. I'll spin it around this way, and then once I get these stitches in, this isn't going to move on me. And I'll be able to do my reinforcement X stitches without much problem. So now I'm just going to do some X's coming up. I'm just going to eyeball it. If you wanted to mark it, you could mark it, or you could use these lines as something to line it up with. When I get to the end, I'll just lock my stitch here. And this is what it looks like from the outside. I've got the reinforcement tab sewn right on there and sewn strong. And then on the inside, this is what it looks like. Oh, looks pretty good. We'll do that to the other 5 triangles. So I've got the tarp set up here in the backyard, and I have to tell you, this is a really sexy tarp. It pitched ultra tight. I'm really happy with that. I still have to pick the tissue paper here out of some of my seams. But it's starting to get dark, so I'm going to seam seal this before it gets dark, and then I'll worry about that tissue paper probably in the morning.